And welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And we are beginning the section that deals with, sadly, the golden calf. That's perhaps a high point, one of the high points of Tisa that's memorable about it. And it's, of course, its location between the two parshiot that talk about the construction of the tabernacle and the two parshiot that follow it that also talk about the completion of the construction of the tabernacle and its accounts. And here, slap bang in the middle, we have this narrative about the golden calf. And it really has a lot to tell us about how Judaism understands human nature and the fact that on some levels human nature is so ugly and fractured, and full of faults, and yet at the same time there are possibilities of atonement, of expressing regret, of learning from these kinds of things, and of course, the other piece that contrasts so much with the worship of the golden calf, which, by the way, of course, represents such a lack of appreciation on the part of the Israelites after all these miracles God has performed for them, amazing miracles. But we have this wonderful passage, mystical passage, of where God reveals his 13 attributes of divine mercy to Moses. And Moses has a vision of God that is deep. And, there's something in all of this that perhaps, in facing our faults, in looking honestly at our lack of appreciation for so many things, that maybe something truly great can come out of it all. At any rate, into the text. Yes,
The arrow is pointing to the text we did yesterday. We're on
right.
line Aleph.
Yes, we're actually here. Right. Thank you. I'll move the arrow. Vayarha, the people saw ki voshesh Moshe laredet minahar, that Moses was taking so long to come down from the mountain. Vayikahel ha'am al Aharon, and the people gathered against Aaron. Vayomru elav, and they said to him, Kum, get up. Aseh lanu Elohim, make for us gods, and this is plural here, asher yelchu lefanenu, which will go before us. That's yelchu is a plural form of the verb. Ki ze Moshe ish, because this Moses, the man Moses, asher he'elanu me'eretz Mitzrayim, who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, lo yadanu me hayalo. We have no idea what's happened to him. So it's interesting statements, and trying to get down to, the idea of despair and how despair can lead to great troubles, great mistakes. And Rashi's going to help us pull this apart in terms of how this comes together, right? So Moses was delayed, right? Ki voshesh Moshe. Ketargumor, Rashi says it's just like in the Targum, right? Are ochar Moshe, right? Ochar is la'acher is to delay, right? To be delayed. So he says this word boshesh, which is a little bit of an unusual word, right? It's the way the Targum translates it. Lashon ichur. It has the meaning of delay. And Rashi gives examples, typical Rashi, of other examples in the Bible where this word is used, not too many places. V'chein boshesh rochbo, right? Indeed, his chariot is delayed. This is in the Song of Deborah in the book of Judges, Shoftim, chapter 5. And the Song of Deborah, she envisions the Sisera's mother commenting that his chariot is late, and the reason why he's delayed is because he's so busy taking spoil. Of course, that wasn't the reason, but the idea that his chariot was delayed. Yes. Was there going to be a, yeah, go ahead.
Rashi attributes it to Judges 5:28.
Okay, so here we just have Judges 5. He doesn't, unfortunately, this text does not give the full reference, verse 28. Vayachilu ad bush, another example, also from Judges chapter 3. It says, I believe it means they waited, right? They waited until it became very late. And this is a story of someone who was going, this king who was slaughtered in the bathroom, and he had gone to the bathroom, and they were waiting for him to come out of the bathroom, and he was taking such a long time. His name was Agag, right? King Agag, and he was actually again someone who was a great enemy or led an enemy of the Israelites, and so he was actually killed. So another word, bosh. Ki kisha'ala Moshe. Now Rashi explains what's going on here. Why did they think he was delayed? Because they were actually confused. Ki kisha'ala Moshe lahar. Because when Moses went up to the mountain, before he went up to the mountain, Amar lahem, he said to them, Lesof arba'im yom ani ba. He says, at the end, at the conclusion of 40 days, I will come, I'll return, betoch shesh sha'ot, in the first 6 hours, in other words, between 6 a.m. and noon. Kisvurim heim, and they thought, they misunderstood, stuff that comes from misunderstandings. They understood Haim, they thought she'oto yam she'alah min haminyan, that the day he went up was the first of those 40 days. They thought it was day number one, min haminyanhu, that was the first of the 40 days. So Vehu, but Moses, Amar lahem shleimim. When he said to them, he was talking about full days, complete 24-hour days, a mem yom valayla imor, right? 40 complete days, the day and the preceding night with it. The yom aliyato, but the day that he actually went up, ein leilo imor. It was not following, that was not a day that was following its night. It wasn't a complete day. And so if you calculate it, right, from this, if you count the seventh of Sivan, right, Hare Shiv'ah b'Sivan, on the seventh day of Sivan, Allah, he went up on Mount Sinai. So according to tradition, the Torah was given on the sixth of Sivan, and then he went up, he brought down the tablets, or no, he didn't bring down the tablets, forgive me. They were standing there at the foot of the mountain. They were listening to God give the Ten Commandments, right? Because he went up and then he received the Ten Commandments. And then, of course, you will see, of course, that he broke them on his way down when he saw them worshiping the golden calf, right? So the point is that he went on up on the seventh of Sivan. They thought the seventh of Sivan was the first day. So there are 28, let's see, Sivan has 30 days. So that would be 23 days. And then if you add 17 to that, you get 40. And that's the 17th of Tammuz. And we know that the 17th of Tammuz, by the way, in our calendar is a fast day. And it's a fast that, for one, commemorates the worship of the golden calf and the repentance that we have to do for that. Okay. So Nimtza Yom Mem B'Yud Zav B'Tammuz. So then the 40th day would be the 17th of Tammuz. Betet Zion, on the 16th of Tammuz, Ba Hasatan, the Satan came. Ve'irbev et haolam, he confounded the world, he caused confusion in the world. Behera, how did he actually do this? Hera demut choshech. He showed a dark image for afela, right? So in other words, the world became dark and foggy, for arbuvia and confused, lomar confounded, lomar to say, vadai met Moshe. In other words, the weather around, the situation around, was so messy and awful that they were convinced that Moses must have died on the mountain. Lechach ba Vadai met Moshe, that Moses was definitely dead. Lechach ba irbuvia laolam, and that's why the world is such a messy place, because Moses is dead. Amar lahem, and he said to them, Mate Moshe, Moses has died. Shekvar ba'u sheshaot, because take a look, we're already in 6 days 6 hours have come on this 17th of Tammuz. The lo ba, he hasn't arrived, and he said he was coming within those first 6 hours. V'chule, etc. Kedeita b'Masechet Shabbat, and Rashi gives us the source. This is in the tractate Shabbat in the Babylonian Talmud, even the page Daf Peitet. That's an editorial edition, I'm sure. Page 89. Ve'if shalomar, and you can't say shelo ata'u ela bayom hama'unan, that the reason that they were confused is because it was a cloudy day, and so they lost track of time, and they thought already that it was late, and that was the reason why they were thought Moses was delayed and therefore dead, etc. Bein kodem chatzot, they and so sorry, let me keep going. Bein la'ar chatzot. In other words, they couldn't tell whether it was before noon or afternoon. Shaharei lo yarad Moshe, because the truth is that wasn't the reason they got confounded. They were confused. Shaharei lo yarad Moshe ad yom hamachorat, because in fact, okay, Moses actually came down, right, the next day. Shne'emar, as it says, Vayashkimu mimacharot vayalu ulot, because it actually says in the text that they got up early in the morning the next day and they started to bring offerings to the idols, to the idol. Going on with the verse, Asher yechu lefanenu, so that it can go before us. Elo, so yechu they, right? Notice the plural. Rashi's showing us attention to the fact that it uses plural language. Elohut harbe, or Elohot harbe ivu lahem. They wanted lots of gods, not just one. They wanted lots. So again, an additional component to the idolatry. Kizeh Moshe. So here's the thing: it says Zeh, this Moses, the man, and because Zeh is a demonstrative pronoun, in other words, when you say this, you're pointing at something, right? That's when you say this. You point to the thing and you say this particular object, right? Kemin demut Moshe alahem Satan. That the Satan showed them what appeared to be a figure of Moses, right? The image of Moses. Satan showed them. Shenosim oto ba'avir, in which he was sort of carried in the air, ba'avir rekia hashamayim, in the air of the firmament of heaven.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
did you do the part of the Rashi from a couple of Rashis ago where it said that they rose early the next day and sacrificed an
Yes.
oleh?
Yes. Yes. I did. Here it's right here. Vayashkimu mimacharat vayalu'olot.
I'm sorry, I didn't
You
hear that
know, that's
about the
okay.
offering.
No problem. No, because that's the point is they did that the next day.
Right,
Wasn't because they he didn't show up before noon. They were confused and it was dark, and that's the reason they did it. It really has to do with the fact that they didn't understand that he meant 40 complete days.
right.
That's what he meant. So going on, Asher Elanu Me'eretz Mitzrayim. Can just make sure I want to, yeah. Who brought us up out of the land of Egypt. Vahaya Moreh Lanu, and Rashi just goes on interpolating, and he was teaching us, he was showing us, instructing us, Haderech, on the way, the path, Asher Na'aleba, in which we are to go up. Ata Srichin Anu, this Ata with an ayin means, and now we require the Elot Asher Yelchu Lefanenu. We need other gods to go, or we need gods to go before us. So it's interesting that in the discussion, in the rabbinic discussion, and the midrashim about this, this is a fairly well-known midrash where they talk about the Satan, right? And I think part of the notion of the Satan, the quality of the Satan, is that he confuses and deceives. That his object is to confuse and deceive people. But we believe in one God. We believe in one God alone. And that means that the Satan also comes from a divine source. And again, it goes deeply into a question of what the purpose of living is and what significance there is to being alive and what significance do our lives have. And one of those answers, and there's several, but one of them involves us being tested. The notion of life as a test, the model of life as a test, is something that's definitely out there. Certainly, it applies to Abraham. We talk about the fact in Pirkei Avot they mention that there were 10 tests with which Abraham was tested, and if you read the narrative, you'll see that there are all these tests which culminate finally in the binding of Isaac, which it says explicitly that God tested Abraham. But they also talk about the notion of a test, like with a goldsmith, right, or a potter, that when they test their products to make sure that they are well made. And the issue is that if a potter sees that the pot isn't made well to begin with, they don't bother tapping on it to test its soundness. They only test ones that appear to be sound and good. And likewise, that's why God tests good people, that we are all tested. And it also goes deeply into this whole idea of trusting God. To what degree do we really believe that there is a divine power that actually is ultimately in control, and that we have to bow ourselves to the judgments of that power and recognize, I believe it was Rabbi Kiva who said it very, very well. And he said, everything ultimately is for the best. And to try and gain a sense of security in God and in this divine power. And had they had this at this moment, and here's the point in this narrative, is they had that demonstrated very clearly. David, welcome. I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, so go ahead and finish your thought, though. I just then I'll ask my question.
No, that's basically it. In other words, in trying to understand the role of the Satan, who nevertheless doesn't represent a different divine source, but is also, in other words, an agent of the divine. How do we understand the relationship of Satan as this deceiver, etc., and saying that, had they had enough faith to begin with, Satan wouldn't have deceived them, and that it's simply a way of trying to express how we're tested as human beings. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the question I have is, prior, okay, even if they hadn't messed up the counting of the days, hadn't
Yes.
they already started worshiping the golden calf? I mean, wasn't that already something that they were doing, or did this just happen on the day that because Moses didn't return? That's the point I'm confused about.
Okay. Yeah. So if you read the narrative, it does appear that they received the Ten Commandments. They went as far as saying, all that the Lord has said, we will do and we will understand. In other words, they were at a very high point of faith. And that it was only at the end of these 40 days, which they had miscounted, where they became panicky. Also, we had read yesterday that they were influenced by the mixed multitude that went up with them. We actually do read in the text that the Erev Rav, that this mixed multitude, were the ones who really influenced them to build the golden calf. And of course, there's a lot to ponder as far as that is concerned, because I can tell you, I myself, want to welcome people who are not necessarily of Jewish extraction, and also people who sympathize and are supportive of Judaism and the concepts of Judaism, even if they themselves don't necessarily convert formally to Judaism. But on the other hand, so the way I understand this is, we ourselves can be an Erev Rav, but in terms of the story itself, it's sort of, there's some irony there that here these people went up with them when they observed, the miracles that were taking forth in Egypt, that here, as powerful as Egypt was, the Israelites, was able to rescue them from the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. And they were so impressed by all these miracles and the power being demonstrated by God that they associated themselves with the Israelites in leaving Egypt. But apparently their faith wasn't sufficient, and they had an influence. And I think, just being aware of influences on ourselves and being able to make a distinction between influences that are positive and influences that aren't positive, all that is part of being tested.
Yeah, I get okay. I that makes sense. I guess I was just trying to understand if the whole construction of the golden calf and that those aspects occurred prior to him missing the time frame when he was supposed to return, or did all that happen like within one day of
That's what I'm understanding. It
oh, it
happened
happened.
the day afterwards. Remember, it says they got up the next day.
Yeah, and
So
then okay, and that's when they basically constructed the golden calf and everything.
and started worshiping it. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
I'm,
Okay,
I'm glad you clarified that.
yeah,
It does seem to me as the reason why the 17th of Tammuz is the day that we fast on in remembrance of the golden calf is because of the decision to do it.
yeah.
Not necessarily that was the day they did it, but that the decision to do it was that day. And let's take a little bit more here and see what happened. Okay?
Thank you.
Of course, of course. So the next verse. Okay. Vayomer Alehem. So they came to Aaron and demanded that he make a god for them, or gods for them. Vayomer Alehem Aharon. So Aaron, of course, is facing this mob of people who are panicking, right? How do you deal with a panicking mob, right? So he says to them, Parku nizme hazahav, remove or untie the gold rings, asher be'oznei neshechem, which are in the ears of your wives, b'neichem, your sons, uvnotechem, and your daughters, v'haviu elai, and bring them to me. And this Rashi is really cool because it takes note of the fact that that Aaron says, which he says, remove the earrings or the rings that are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters. This could have been left out, right? It could have said, and Aaron said to them, remove the rings, remove your rings and bring them to me. Could have said that, didn't. So, why? But Oznei Neshechem, in the ears of your wives. Amar Aharon belibo. Aaron said in his heart. In other words, Aaron thought, Hanashim v'hayeladim, that when it comes to women and children, chasim betachshitehen, they care about their adornments. They don't want to have these things removed from them. They're going to object to that because they're attached to their adornments. Tashkitehem hein. Shema yitakev. Possibly they will delay hadavar. They'll cause a delay to this incident. Uvetochach, and in that delay, Yavo Moshe, Moses will arrive. Vehem, okay, period. Vehem lo himtinu, but they didn't delay. They weren't, they didn't want to deal with that. Ufarkume alatzmam, and they simply removed their own earrings and their own ornaments. But he tried. So this verse suggests that Aaron actually was attempting to delay this in the hopes of averting the major problem. Parku, I believe it's parku. I want to make sure. Yeah, parku, remove. as opposed to pirku, but it's parku, right? So this parku is lashon sivui. It's an imperative. It's a command. He says, take, remove as a command. Migzerat parak, right? So it's from the root of parak, to remove. Parok maybe liachid, or parek liachid. So it's to an individual, it would be parek. To an individual, to one individual, it would be parek. Kamo barchu, right? As you say, barchu, bless, to in the plural form, migzerat, um, sorry, let me see, beirech, right? Right. Or barech, forgive me. So to bless, when you say to an individual, you need to bless, and then it would be barech. I believe I'm correct in terms of that grammar. And I'm going to stop here, and we will continue, God willing, next time we meet, which will be Friday for us. So let me put that in here, see if I can do that. Yep, there it is. Okay, I missed the first time. All right. And why don't I just stop the share here? Any other thoughts?
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead, Lauren.
a bunch, and they're all related, but the Satan was sent by God. So, speaking the words God wanted him to speak and showing miraculous images, of Moses floating up to heaven.
Mhm.
And I don't understand how the Israelites were supposed to understand that that wasn't God,
Mhm.
because they wouldn't know from Satan yet. And I don't think they would. And, you know, this was miraculous, so they could attribute that to God. And they were already confused about they weren't being led. They were worried about not being led. Um, and they were searching. Actually, the whole time Chabad uses leaders instead of gods, which I found interesting, because I see it says Elohim, etc. But they're looking for a god to tell them what to do. And then something that seems like God comes down and says, well, Moses is dead, just, carry on understanding that. And here we are being punished eternally because of this act that was very human of them. It wasn't like, yes, they had the benefit of having seen God perform miracles, but they didn't understand because this guy did the same thing. And they were confused. And
Okay.
yeah, Satan came down and deliberately confused them.
Right. Okay. So I'm glad you brought this up, because one of the things that the rabbis try to do is to try and make the Jewish people not look so bad. And given what you're deriving from this, it removes some of the blind guilt that with which one can accuse the Jewish people. So it's in a way, it's a literary way of saying, that yes, there were elements to this whole situation which make it less, vicious than it might appear. Um, Having said that, on the other hand, it's saying how terribly important it is not to have a "what have you done for me lately" kind of approach to things. And that, of course, is a major character thing that we all have to deal with when especially if we're believers and if we're conscious of all the miracles that God does for us. And then when we face, any kind of adversity, where do we go with that emotionally and intellectually? So I think that on the one hand, the use of Satan is a way of trying to mitigate somewhat the guilt on the part of the Jewish people. But
Technically, also, they didn't have the Torah yet.
they did, of course, they had received the Ten Commandments.
The Ten Commandments, yeah.
They heard that.
But
That's pretty impressive.
that's a bunch of rules. It's not like, oh, a bunch of ethical teachings, it's
It is in a way. It's also ethical.
I
I
mean,
mean,
they weren't necessarily stealing or coveting, or disobeying the
what's
Ten
the first
Commandments.
what's the first commandment?
Well, yeah, except for
Or
that
maybe the
one.
second, right? Thou shalt have no other gods before me.
Right.
You can't excuse that, right?
That's true.
You can find, remember we said an explanation is not an excuse. So you could say that this Satan story is an explanation, but it's not an excuse. And the other thought that I had in terms of, listening to what you had to say is that I think what's so important, and it's something that I hopefully, in trying to mature, I realize, is that when I was much younger, I had this very sophomoric attitude of saying, look at those Israelites, look at what they were doing, et cetera, et cetera. And now I say, I might have been one of the ringleaders, to recognize just how, how flawed I really am. But, you can't improve if you don't recognize your flaws. If you don't see them as flaws, you'll never do anything about it.
Well,
And
they
so,
were
yeah, go ahead.
fearful and desperate, and that does cause confusion,
True.
and
It
because they
does.
they were
But
worried because wasn't down. They didn't, know how to count it, and
remember, one day late. One
I
day.
know it would have been nice if Moses had given them a date instead of made them count.
Well, let's blame Moses.
Okay, that Moses helped cause them
We,
confusion.
we can say that. We can
I mean,
say
they were obviously confused about the date.
they were. They were confused about the date. But again, this kind of, in some ways, this is such an important, we could say, well, what if, what if, what if? But at the same time, I really feel that the whole purpose of the story is to try to help us look at our lives with a different kind of lens, and perhaps with a lens that's closer to the truth about the nature of human beings and our own natures, etc. David?
Yeah, I guess my observation is it's also kind of the faith versus action kind of aspect, right? You know, how far do you take faith before you feel you have to take action, right? And we see that. I mean, we see that all throughout history, right? I mean, you still have to wonder, during World War II, I mean, we still action had to be taken, or we all would have been wiped out, against Hitler, right? So, how far, yeah, where's that balance between faith and action? And how much do we can actually control? Because here, what I'm hearing you say is that they should add more faith and not taking the action, right? So that's kind of the message here is you should add faith. You knew the first commandment. You shouldn't have done this action.
Right.
Whereas, hey, how do you know when I'm actually somewhat in control, or I'm supposed to be in control, and I should take an action, right? So, anyway,
I can give you the flip answer to that, which is check your rabbi.
yeah, okay, fine, but
It's flip. I'm being flip. Okay.
yeah. So, yeah,
Yeah, I know.
I mean, in this case, they're being punished because they took an action,
Right.
and it was deemed that they hadn't had enough faith, right? But how do you make that judgment? Where do you draw that boundary?
I hear you. I hear you. But again, what this is saying is how seriously do we take the Ten Commandments? And the other piece, which still, think about, is how transformed the world would be if we took these things seriously. It would be a different world. But we don't. I mean, so in a sense, given the fact that this was right out, they'd heard God speak that first commandment. The first two commandments they actually heard from the divine voice telling them. They all had that. Well, how quickly we forget, right? And how quickly do we allow our emotions to govern our behavior? But I mean, the point you make is a really good point, and that's part of studying. I mean, the idea of Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, that the study of Torah is, sort of the equivalent of the value of all the other commandments, is because it does help us try to deal with the very question that you raised. So let me stop the recording here, and with God's help, we'll see you, on Friday.